All right. Who is ready for the word tonight? Are we ready? There we go. Well, worship team as always, fantastic. And just gets you fired up, gets you ready for that last little bit of the week. So tonight we're going to continue. And I don't know, Pastor Steve didn't tell me if this is the last of the series on duplicating the miracles of Jesus. But if it isn't, great. If it is, now you really got to lean in. Now we got to focus. So I want to start with Mark 7, verse 24. And it says, Jesus got up and went away from there to the region of Tyre, where he had entered a house. He wanted no one to know of it, yet he could not escape notice. How many of us have tried to escape other people? Where's my introverts? Where's my introverts at? You just try and escape. You just got a little bit of sanity, and then you're ready to go out in the world again. But how many of us know that Jesus did this for a very specific purpose? Why did he go away from his place of ministry to a place where he was unknown and there were few people to minister to? And the point is that everybody needs time to rest and refresh. Matthew 10:24-25 says, "A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. It is enough for the disciple that he become like his teacher." There we go, sorry. Computer was going crazy. It is enough for the disciple that he become like his teacher, and the slave like his master. So if Jesus needed rest in God's presence, is it safe to say that we also need rest in his presence? You know, because if we could attain the same results Jesus did without having to pay the price that Jesus did, then we wouldn't need Jesus, right? And that's not the case. We absolutely need him. And even Jesus showed that reliance on God throughout his earthly ministry. You know, so we're not above him in that sense. And the sooner that we learn that, the better. And you would think that, yes, that sounds like a very simple message. But at the end of the day, how many of us know that we can complicate a simple message very easily, right? So it's persistent, habitual prayer. That was the key characteristic of the life of Jesus. He always took time to pray and to be with the Lord. Prayer is our lifeblood in our relationship with Jesus. Just like our communication is our lifeblood in our marriage, in our friendships, right? So I'm going to share a couple of verses here that talk about when Jesus went to pray. So the first one is Luke 5:15-16. But the news about him was spreading even farther. Large crowds were gathering to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness and pray. And then we got Mark 1:35. In the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went away to a secluded place, and was praying there. Luke 6:12. It was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray. He spent the whole night in prayer to God. That still stuns me because I think, I don't think I would make it through the whole night. So even with coffee, with every little ounce of energy in me, so that'll be a challenge. I hope to say that I have done that at least once in my life. But what happens when we don't take the time to get away and to be with God and to renew ourselves in God? What happens to us? Yes, chaos for once. Yeah, chaos is one, but we get burned out, because we're like a motor not firing on all cylinders. We're trying to draw strength out of an empty well. We're trying to do things in our own way, in our own strength, and somehow try and produce the same results that Jesus did. How many of us have made that mistake? Yeah, yesterday. Because we're all it's a trap we all fall into. because we think, oh, okay, just one day, I missed one day of prayer. And it's not so much about checking that box saying, yes, I've done that, I think the longer you start walking with God, the more you come to realize that it is just as essential to your daily life as food is. And it's hard to understand that when, life might be going well, but when things get tough, then you start leaning in to his presence. Then you start asking him questions, some serious questions, right? Because when we're tired, it affects our ability to trust God, because we're not thinking straight. Have you ever tried driving on the road when you're not when you're tired? Like, it's time to pull over. And I believe the Lord is speaking to us today as his church, that we have to be able to rise up with that bold faith to trust God for the impossible, because it's very clear that, we're going to go through some difficult times as a nation, as a whole world. Honestly, things are going to get very interesting. And if we aren't secure, grounded in our relationship with God, we will be swept away who knows where. And one of the things that Jesus said that, just to keep it simple, is Mark 11:22. He says, have faith in God. And somehow we see that and we're like, yeah, but how? It's like, no, just have faith in God. We somehow still try and look at that and try and, okay, how can I make this work with where I am? How can I try and maneuver in my own approach to this? It's like, no, it's simple. Have faith in God. So without faith, it's impossible to please him. You can't connect to him. You can't receive from him. And Hebrews 11:6 is very clear about this. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he is a rewarder of those who earnestly seek him. When life is going well, it's very easy to believe that he exists, because you look around you and in a material sense, you have what you need. But when things start going, south, and you don't have anywhere to look to fix that little problem or big problem, God is your source. But it's difficult, because if we live in a way where as if he does not exist, then how are we going to expect to come to him and ask him all these things that we need? It's like, you ever heard the term a Christian atheist? You're a Christian in name only. You live as though he does not exist. Is that true of us? Is that true of me? I'm trying to always look at the Bible and see, what is God trying to tell me? What blind spots do I have in my relationship with him, and me as a Christian, as a man of God? Where can God expose some of the parts that need to be exposed? That's what we need to ask him. Because Jesus is looking for faith tonight. It says in Luke 18, verse 8, however, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? He's looking at us tonight, we who want to receive from him. He's looking for one thing, and that's faith. And it doesn't matter how big it is. It doesn't matter how grand or fancy it looks or whatever it is. If it's just a little bit, he can use that. And we're familiar with that, the mustard seed, right? But if we have that, God sees that. He notices that, because he can use that. So tonight we're going to look at a woman that Jesus said had mega faith. Now, this is probably, I don't know if I just didn't read the right translation or what, but I've never heard the word mega in the Bible before. I thought that was pretty interesting. But apparently, the Greek word for great is mega. So in Matthew 15:28, Jesus answered, women, you have great faith. Your request is granted, and her daughter was healed from that very hour. So the Greek word there for great is mega. So we need to be the kind of people that have mega faith. So it sounds a little funny to say, but if that can be said of us, just like it was said of that woman, I mean, I think we would be in a strong position to be a positive influence in our society, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, and in our church, and in our, in our country. Because Jesus talked a lot about faith in people. He was impressed with her faith. He was impressed by the faith of the centurion. In Luke 7:9, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." So then you've got some positive ones, some positive impressions that Jesus got of faith. But then we also have the ones that he wasn't so impressed with. And sadly, that always falls on the disciples. They're such an easy target, but sad to say, I think we fall in that category more than that one, right? So in Luke 8:25, Jesus asked, "Where is your faith?" Matthew 16:8, aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, "You of little faith." He didn't say no faith, he said little faith. So what's the difference between little faith and faith as small as a mustard seed? They're both small. I didn't really think about that until I got to this verse, and I was like, that's actually interesting. So it's not the size, it's what the seed can produce. It's what the seed contains in it, and what that will produce in us and through us. Amen. And in Matthew 17:19-20, it says, "Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, 'Why couldn't we drive it out?' He replied, 'Because you have so little faith.' Why couldn't the disciples drive out the demons?" It's the little faith, but it was a faith that couldn't produce anything. Then you got the mustard seed faith that produces a lot, even though it's small in its, in its starting block. And then you have Mark 4:40. He said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Now he goes to no faith. So I guess little faith and no faith kind of play together there. But Jesus always monitored the faith of his disciples, and that's the same for us today. I believe that he is monitoring our faith to see where we are, because he's always looking for a way to partner with us on the earth. And if we don't have that faith, then that moment, the opportunity that we have for God to work through us will not present itself. And you see that throughout the Bible, men and women who trusted God. We've got Jonathan in 1 Samuel 14:6. Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, "Come, let us go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows, because perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." And then you've got Hebrews 11. When we first started this whole series, we were talking about all these amazing examples. It says in verse 32-35, "And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead and raised to life again." That's what faith can do for us. And it doesn't only do that back then, God still wants to do that today. And I think that's a very, a topic that we don't really focus on a lot, because it's an uncomfortable one. Because it's this reality where we move away from the theory, we move away from all the teachings, and now we actually have to go put that into practice. That's where the rubber meets the road. But I believe that Jesus, now in this season of our lives, I believe that that is what Jesus is calling us to. We see that faith brings healing. Matthew 9:22. Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter. Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed from that moment. Then you got Mark 10:52. Go, Jesus said, your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight. Follow Jesus along the road and follow Jesus along the road. And how do we build up our faith? We always talk about how we need to have more faith, have more faith. What does that actually look like? It looks like someone who is prepared to empty themselves of themselves. Because what do you have in your flesh, earth, sinful state? You have doubt, you have fear, you have all these things that does not come from God. That's not what time in his presence produces. It's the fruit of the Spirit. That's what gets produced in our life, not all of the doubt and the anxiety that we feel in our daily lives. That comes from a place where we're drawing out of our own strength, trying to fix our own problems and take matters into our own hands when they should be put in front of the throne of God. Because if we empty ourselves of that cynicism, disbelief, all that stuff, then God has an opportunity to put something in us that can actually make a difference. Because it's the only way it'll work. So it's a very simple blueprint that Jesus gave us so that we can actually walk in that same spirit, in that same ministry where we can heal, where we can cast out demons, where we can do all of that. But it comes from having that stature, that authority in his presence. That's where we get it from. It's not the church as a, building that gives you that authority. It's the time you spend in his presence. So we have 6 keys to walking with mega faith. And we're going to read this one. I'm throwing a lot of verses at you guys, but I think you guys are up for it. So Matthew 15:21-28. It says, leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Yes, Lord, she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And Jesus answered, you have great faith. Your request is granted, and her daughter was healed from that very hour. She perceived something in that moment that produced what was necessary. It's this combination of, emptying ourselves of ourselves, but then also having that childlike dependence on knowing who our provider is, knowing where we will find healing, where we will find provision, where we will find what we're truly looking for and what we actually need. Jesus was in the region of Tyre and Sidon, which today would be modern day Lebanon. And in this area, there were some Jews, but mostly Phoenicians. And this woman was not Jewish. She was actually a Phoenician. So you might be asking, why is that important? Because she wasn't part of the Abrahamic covenant. Jesus healed a woman in a synagogue. His reason for healing her was that she was a daughter of Abraham. Luke 13:16. Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what has bound her? Healing is one of the benefits that we have in our covenant with God. Exodus 15:26, he said, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, and keep all of his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. Does God have a reason to heal you today based on what we just read? Yes. because we're part of that covenant. It's no longer just this thing of, oh, you have to be of this line. You have to be part, you have to have this background in order for me to heal you. Jesus doesn't say that. And he showed that in that very moment. She wasn't part of the Abrahamic covenant, and he still did it. Wasn't part of his plan that day, probably, but that's what a life with Jesus looks like. You're gonna have your plan, and then he has a very good way of just interrupting it. How many of us have experienced that? Like, I thought my life was going to go in a certain direction. I did not think that I would end up here. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. But when I left my home all the way over in Cape Town, no idea that 10 years later I would be standing here. So you don't know what your faith walk with God will look like and what it will actually do. Because you got Galatians 13 to 14. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. He redeemed us in order that the blessing given to Abraham might come to the Gentiles through Jesus Christ, so that by faith we might receive the promise of the Spirit. This woman heard a lot about Jesus, that he could heal the sick and that he was the coming Messiah. I think she probably knew a lot more about Jesus than the Israelites did in that moment. And why is that? Because she was desperate. She was desperate for God to touch her life. Mark 7, 24 to 25. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house, did not want anyone to know it. Yet he could not keep his presence a secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an evil spirit came and fell at his feet. And that's why it's so important that we stay ready, because we started talking about this in the sense that we need to actually have that place where we can be refreshed and renewed in God's presence. But that also puts the responsibility on us to always be ready. Because wouldn't it be better if, you were in a position where you were already filled, so that when you go out on your day, you have your plan, something comes out of left field, and Jesus, he was ready. That woman was healed. And the woman knew that Jesus was not just a teacher, not just a rabbi, not just a good person. She called him Lord, Son of David, which meant that she knew that Jesus was the promised coming one. And many Christians don't know this about Jesus. They see Jesus as their savior alone, like he's the one that will get me to heaven. But then we forget, we think about everything else in life, and we think about provision, we think about healing, and the first things we go to is more work. Like, oh, I need to live healthier. I need to try and figure out how I can live longer. There's all this stuff, and none of it in a sense is bad, but you have to be able to put God first in those things. He is your healer, so that doesn't mean that you go out and eat, McDonald's every day. Like, you're going to put yourself in trouble. So he does put that responsibility on us. And then he's also our provider, but that does not mean we go and get a new credit card every month. I'm just saying. So finally, we're getting to the 6 keys. 6 keys. Who knows where that can take you? So the first one, Jesus will only operate in your life according to how you see him and receive him. And it reminds me of this other quote where it says, we see life not as it is, but as we are, which means it's what's going on in our hearts. It's what's going on in our innermost being. What's God doing there? Because it's out of that place that we see everything. Instead of seeing a stumbling block, we see an opportunity because of what God put inside of us. She had need, but that alone did not move the hand of God on her behalf. Because if you haven't read that story, you would think that at this point, Jesus would just go to that woman's house, cast out the spirit from the girl, and that be the end of it. But Jesus didn't answer a word. Jesus acts as if he didn't even hear her. Now, that sounds a little odd, but he was on a mission, remember? But have you ever prayed a prayer and thought to yourself, God, did you not hear that? Have you, like, how many times do I have to still ask this thing of you? That's not God's problem. That's not God's fault. Like, we have to go back to his presence and ask him, okay, clearly this is not something you want to do. Okay, so where do I need to, what do I need to correct? Where have I gone wrong? And where am I looking for provision for this, for that, when I should be looking to you? And he'll expose that. Because I always remember this. One of my teachers in Bible college said, what you pray out, you will walk out. So excuse my accent, walk. Does that sound better? Yeah. Walk. You will walk that out, because that is what God wants for you. He wants you to be able to walk these things out so that you can have a true, deep understanding of what it means when you ask for those things. And the second key is, do not judge your faith to not be working or a failure just because you haven't received an immediate answer. Because we can, like myself, I look at some of those verses and I think, oh, immediately healed. As he spoke the word, they were healed. But then we sit here sometimes and we have things that we have asked God for healing for, and it still hasn't happened. That doesn't mean your faith isn't working. He is, yes, exactly, Bernie. He's still working. He is still working, but there's something more that he wants to do, that he sees things from a bigger perspective. He sees things from a more eternal perspective, as opposed to our finite little space and time where we think that this problem is too big for him and therefore he can't do anything about it. He wants to do something more. As you wait for your answer, I guarantee you there are people in your life that are going through things, not similar maybe, but they are going through things. And if you pay careful attention, God will be able to use you. Because I know I'm preaching to the choir here tonight. You guys are strong, you are steady, you know what this is about. Because you can look in your life and see that's a person that needs God. It's like, God, use me in this time of waiting. That's what he can do. Because we walk by faith and not by sight. Doesn't mean you go it's not like this. Like, I always thought oh, okay, that means it's just blind faith. Almost stepped over there. It doesn't mean that. It means that you're walking on every word that he says. You're walking on his words as you continue your faith journey, right? So think about it like that. The next time there's something challenging, even now, if there's something challenging, grab onto those promises and actually picture yourself walking on them, because it's going somewhere. Because faith does not operate on our clock. That's a tough one. It's like, God, it's time. It's the 11th hour. Come on, do something. It just doesn't happen. But that's where the trust comes in. It's nice to have faith in God when it's convenient. But when it's not convenient, that's when it starts adding that little bit of pressure. And mega faith does not give up. That's key 3. Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. So not only did they have little faith, they just told Jesus, send her away. Like, come on, disciples, work with me here. She continues with the disciples until they ask Jesus to tell her to go away. So what does it mean when your prayers aren't answered right away? Nothing. Don't overcomplicate it. Continue to believe. Because notice what happened. Her faith was ignored, then denied, and then he answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Jesus gives her this whole theological argument saying that he's the son of David and was sent only to the Israelites. But she still didn't give up. The woman came, knelt before him, and said, Lord, help me. She worships him and asks for help after she was ignored and denied. She didn't understand everything that Jesus was trying to tell her, but she worshiped him anyway. That's the place where your faith, where you as a person, when you are refined, that refiner's fire that we talk about, that's in the Bible, that's when that refining process happens. When things just don't line up anymore. You're like, I don't even know what's going on, God, but I'm going to continue praising you. I'm going to continue sitting in your presence, seeking you, because I know that you are in this. Because that's the eye of the storm. Of course, it's going to look overwhelming. If you're sitting in the eye of the storm, yes, you're in the safest place, but everywhere around you is not so safe. And notice what happened. She didn't give up. She still continued. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, to give God a sacrifice of praise when you don't see anything happening. And Hebrews 13:5 says, through him, then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of lips that give thanks to his name. Habakkuk 3:17-18. Though the fig tree should not blossom, there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Talk about faith. Like, let that one just kind of like in the Bible when it says Selah, like that's a good moment right there. Because he's trying to teach us that it's not just about what he can give us. But what is it producing in us? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're taking with us. Like, we can leave an eternal influence on this earth because we decided to continue to exalt in the Lord, to rejoice in the God of our salvation despite everything around us. Mega faith worships even when it doesn't understand what is happening. Key number 4. So if you serve God long enough, there will be things that you don't understand. And I'm well aware that most people here are probably a little bit older than me. And so you know better than I do. But that's the thing. There's going to come a point in time when you're just not going to understand what's going on. She didn't understand what was going on, why she was being denied, but she still believed and worshiped him. Deuteronomy 29, verse 29. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. So what are some of the secret things? He'll reveal those to you through time in his presence. She worshiped God beyond her understanding. And that's why I love Proverbs 3, verse 5-6, to not lean on your own understanding. Do we only worship him to the extent of our understanding of him? And then you have a great example in Job. Lost his kids, his possession, his health. Here in chapter 120-22, it says, at this, Job got up, tore his robe, shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord forever be praised. Satan told God that when bad things happen to Job, that Job is going to curse him. And it didn't happen. Job 13:15. Though he slay me, yet I will trust in him. It's like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire. That's the very last hour, like the very last second minute, and still God preserved them. Job didn't know what was going on at the time. He didn't understand, but he continued to worship God. And then you've got someone like Naaman, who in 2 Kings 5, verse 9 to 12, being a leper, he wanted to quit when he was insulted because he was a man of stature, but he needed healing. He didn't have anywhere to turn to anymore. So Naaman went to his horses and chariots, stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan." Now, the Jordan was not the cleanest place on earth. So one thing, but he had to do it 7 times. And your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed. But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me, stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy." What was happening in that moment? Trying to get rid of the pride that stood in the way of his healing. He was trying to uproot that thing by really just, I wouldn't say humiliate him, but definitely like went right to the core, like really struck a chord with Naaman. Are not Abana and Pharpar, is that how it's, yeah, I'll say it like that, the rivers of Damascus better than any of the waters in Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in a rage. I mean, it's easy to look at that and say, yeah, like obviously just get in the water, get it over with. But how many times has pride stood in the way of God moving in our life? This man was only a step away from his miracle, but if he had it his way, he wouldn't have the miracle. When God sent Moses to deliver the Israelites, it got worse instead of better. In Exodus 5:23, it says, "Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he brought trouble upon this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." Moses was angry. And when you're having financial issues, or you're having, and you pray to God and you get fired, or you pray for healing, you go to the doctor and you found that it's gotten worse. You pray for your marriage, and instead of it getting better, it just continues to deteriorate. That's where we need to continue to lean into him. It doesn't make sense, and we're not going to have all the answers to these things. But I think that's where key plays a vital role. And then you've got key number 5. Mega faith always agrees with God. That's hard, because faith in its simplest form is agreeing with God. Faith doesn't start with us, it starts with God. Romans 10:17, it says, "So faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ." Romans 4:3, what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So simply by believing, he was credited as righteous because he agreed with God. So when in our life, again, we make it too complicated, because again, that's where our other part comes in, and we want to reason this, we want to rationalize this, we want to try and figure out how we can make this, how can we force the situation, when we should just be able to step back and allow God to move in that situation as he pleases. And then you've got Mary that agreed with God, and when he told her that she would have a son, Luke 1:38, "I am the Lord's servant," Mary answered, may it be to me as you have said. Let's try that next time. May it be as you have said. And then key number 6, mega faith never gives up. Yes, Lord, she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. She didn't contradict Jesus. She just found this, she found that point, that she found that little bit of faith, and that's what produced her healing. That's what produced her miracle. She didn't contradict him. She said, dogs still eat the crumbs of the masters. She wouldn't give up, and neither should you. And you've got Luke 18, verse 1-5. Now he was telling them a parable to show them that at all times they ought to pray and to not lose heart, saying, in a certain city there was a judge who did not fear God and did not respect man. There was a widow in that city. She kept coming to him saying, give me legal protection from my opponent. For a while he was unwilling, but afterward he said to himself, even though I do not fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will give her legal protection. Otherwise, by continually coming, she will wear me out. Do we actually wear God out? And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge said. Now, will not God bring about justice for his elect, who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you that he will bring about justice for them quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? It's like, you don't have to, you know, like, it's like thinking about your like that question about whether or not, like, what will you would take out of your house if the fire starts. And I always used to say, oh, I would obviously take my Bible and I would take my PlayStation. Keep in mind, I was like 10. But that's what I would always say. But right at this point in time, you know, the only thing that really doesn't matter is, you know, it's what God has produced inside of you. And Jesus shows us 2 important things. We need to act like that woman who did not give up. And we need to have the ability to stay before God and to not give up based on faith. Because Jesus' advice to Jairus when his daughter was died was, do not be seized with alarm and struck with fear. Only keep on believing. It's like, Jesus, she's dead. What? Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, this situation is not like, you know, beyond hope anymore. It's completely lost. And somehow, through her faith, through her believing God, you know, came back to life. So what in your life has long since died? What are some of the prayers that you have prayed that you've given up on? There's many of them, and I think that's where we, instead of continuing to sit by his feet, those unanswered prayers turn into cynicism. They turn into everything except what it needs to actually produce the miracle. But that's what I want to ask you guys is, what have you given up on in that sense, where you've continued to pray, you've continued to believe? But I think we can look at someone like Job. We can look at, you know, those verses in Habakkuk that says, you know, although everything is literally falling apart around me, yet I will trust in you, yet I will exalt your name. That is so encouraging to me, because that tells me that I still have some improvement to make. I have not arrived. We have not arrived. So we always have something new to learn. We always have something that God can give us that we didn't even know that we needed. Like when I first started, you know, exercising, is like you start discovering you had muscles that you didn't have, and you start like everything hurts, when you first start. It's like, oh gosh, I didn't even know I had that muscle there. It's like, okay, yeah, I need to improve. I need to continue doing, these exercises, put myself under this, process. And through time, you'll continue to grow. You'll continue to learn and become stronger for it. Because that's what God wants. He wants to produce a faith in us that will be able to stand strong in the midst of chaos, in the midst of everything going, down the drain. Because that's the kind of people that we need to be, even now when things are still pretty okay. I mean, we have a lot to be thankful for, but then you have amazing examples in places around the world where they really are faced with life and death in their when they walk out their faith walk with God. And when we come to a point like that, I hope we don't, but in our life, does that not make us, because of that comfort that we sit in, it should be able to shake us loose a little bit and say, okay, I'm ready. God, use me. Do something with my life, even as I'm waiting for you. Because I'm trusting you. You are a provider. You will heal. You will fix this. You will do that. But while what are you doing while you're waiting? Do you just sit there? Like, walk it out. Be like, encourage people. When you don't have the encouragement that you want, go and give it. God's continuing to pour into us. And do we just want to be these like full vessels, but then keep it all to ourselves? We get so cozy with coming to church on a Sunday or a Wednesday. We get what we need, and then we just, make a beeline for the house, or, whatever it is. Never thinking twice about someone that we just passed. I'm speaking to myself. And that's the great thing about this, is that it's just continually holding up a mirror in front of us and showing us, that's what you can do something here. You can do something there. What about that person? Okay, I've heard you. You need this. Who can you pray for instead now? So why don't we, in groups of 2, what I want us to do is to just think about and pray together about some of the things that that you need God to revive. Something that's personal to you that you've given up on, but then also something where God can show you to be a blessing to someone else. Because in the waiting, to not give up on the prayer that you've prayed, but to also realize that as you're waiting, God wants to use you. God wants to speak through you. Because it's through that struggle that you somehow you found the right words to speak encouragement over someone's life. To speak life instead of death over someone. To remind them that God is faithful when they have completely given up hope. So why don't we do that? And then that will be the end of it. All right.